Yes.
Let people trickle in before we get started so we can ensure that everybody catches as much of the presentation as possible. So hello.
So everybody looks like they've gotten a little caught up on their sleep. That's good.
That's always helpful, right?
Always.
And the camera's down here.
Hey, Deborah, how are you?
I'm doing great. What about you?
I'm doing fine, thanks. Yeah.
Good. Thank you all for joining us. This is not the official welcome. So this is just the chit chat, the tap dancing, so that we can make sure everybody see most of the presentation. So if anybody has any good gossip, good tidbit of information they want to just share with their nearest and dearest, please do so. So my colleagues and I were talking before the session today when we were making sure everything was in line for a successful morning. And we were talking about the fact that despite all of the improvements that have come to the world, that getting that first time appointment for salespeople is still a challenge. Of course, that's good news for us since we're always helping people improve that process. And yet, even we don't have the magic bullet solution after 40 years of working in this arena. So if any of you have come up with the magic bullet and want to share it today, don't keep it to yourself. We all want to learn what that is.
I would just say this is now I think our 9th month of virtual BusinessWise Insiders. And when we first did this in March, I was thinking maybe we'd have a couple of months, then we'd get back to normal. That's obviously not the case. I'm going to bet that we're going to make it to a full year pretty easily. But it's been great, not least because it's a good opportunity for our clients and colleagues in all 3 of our markets to get together, and for all of us wise guys to see everybody's faces. Deborah, I don't know if you had any reflections on how BusinessWise Insiders has gone over the past 9 months compared to previously. I know that usually the face-to-face networking and getting to know each other is a core benefit of it.
I think
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, like most things in life, there's usually 2 sides. And on the one hand, what makes me really happy is the additional participation that we sometimes couldn't get from our clients and friends when they just couldn't deal with the traffic and getting to and from in that time. So virtual makes things much easier. The other thing is, from my perspective, is that not only do I get to see the Atlanta folks, but I get to see the Charlotte and Dallas-Fort Worth people, and that's terrific. I have to say that I do miss that actual in-person stuff, as I expect we all do. And at the same time, I've almost come to feel like this is normal. I don't know what that says about me. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. And I guess I would circle back to what I started out with, that there are pros and cons to most things, and I'm going to choose to focus on the pros. So in this way, I'm very happy that we decided to go virtual. And now I will officially welcome everyone, and so glad that you're here. I think it's probably time to turn things over to my colleague, Sam Mitchell, who will get to the meat of the matter.
Yes, thank you very much. Bear with me for 1 second here. I just,
We will
so
do
I'm going to
that
start the
too.
presentation in a minute. But because, as usual, because of the large number of attendees, I'm just going to take the liberty of putting you all on mute for the duration of the presentation. Now I'll share my screen again. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see that. And just want to say good morning again and welcome to BusinessWise Insiders. I'm just going to quickly review how we expect things to proceed this morning so you guys have an idea of what to expect. In a moment, I'll start the presentation, which will take 20 to 25 minutes. And after that, we'll divide into smaller breakout rooms where you'll have an opportunity to say hello and introduce yourselves and ask questions and share ideas about today's topic or any other business development challenge or priority that's on your mind. If you do have questions during the presentation, feel free to ask them in the chat window and one of our wise guys will take note of it and Deborah or I may address it in the course of the presentation, or we'll make a note to talk about it later in the breakout room. And of course, you can write down any questions you have and ask them later in the breakout rooms yourselves. And finally, in the spirit of replicating some of the engagement that we had during the old in-person Insiders days, I'll be putting a few questions to the group throughout the course of the presentation using Zoom's polling feature. It won't be sort of woven into the presentation. It'll just sort of be on the side, asking people their opinions and behaviors on some of the topics. It's all anonymous, no pressure to answer, but it's a great way to get a sense of everyone's thoughts about some of the questions materials we'll be covering today. And it's something we may touch on later in the breakout sessions. So with that, let's dive into the presentation. And the topic today is prospecting with the right tool, when to call and when to email for more connections. And these challenges and questions that you see on the screen sort of come from the frustration that many sales reps are feeling with the sometimes lack of response they get to various prospecting channels, particularly cold calling and emailing. You see them asking themselves often, is cold calling worth my time and energy? What do I do if my prospect doesn't answer? Isn't email prospecting just another form of spam? And these questions and challenges have felt especially acute this year, but they're nothing new in recent years. Cold calling was always a challenge, but with cell phones and caller ID and fewer traditional gatekeepers, cold calling has become even more difficult. And it's no easier on the email side. People are literally on the clock every waking hour. Staying on top of your regular work, email is daunting, so breaking through with cold email seems impossible at times. And with so little face-to-face interaction, phone and email represent the two ways to connect with prospects, so it's easy to feel at a loss. And so the sales reps who still believe cold calling and cold emailing work will look for whatever edge they can get. And they'll ask themselves things like, what time of day should I call or email my prospect? Do different prospects respond differently to calls versus emails? And do emails work better on some days of the week than others? And while it's useful to think about these things because every edge obviously matters, it's also easy to get bogged down by these kinds of details and lose sight of the big picture. So back to our original question, what's the right mix of cold calling and cold emailing? When is one better than the other? And how can you use the strategies in tandem to make things more effective? I'm just going to launch a poll now while I continue. And so the first step that we wanted to emphasize may be the most obvious, but it's really important. And that's that for a robust prospecting strategy, you need to do both cold call and cold email. And that's because whatever strategic adjustments you make, your starting point should be an approach to prospecting that's built on a healthy mix of both cold calling and cold emailing. The basic premise is simple and again, pretty obvious. As making prospect connections becomes more challenging, and with that one clear path to a prospect always elusive, you need to make use of every tool in your toolbox. And if you don't, you're really tying one hand behind your back. But it's not only because you need to do whatever you can to earn that prospect connection. There are specific reasons to consistently cold call and cold email. The first is related to a truism of lead generation, which is that on average, it takes several touches, a call or email or some other exposure to your message before a prospect makes a decision to engage with you. Every call and email represents one of those touches. So the more consistently you employ them, the more likely you are to get to that threshold where a prospect engages. The second is that no two prospects are exactly alike. You probably have people you work with that are more likely to respond to a phone call than an email, and vice versa. It's the same with prospects. The more diverse your prospecting strategy, the more likely you are to reach the right prospect with the right tool. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, emails can amplify cold calls and vice versa. Every email and cold call by itself is a potential lead source, but that potential goes way up when you use email and cold calling in tandem. And that's something we'll explore later in the presentation. And before I move on, I just wanted to invite Deborah, as I typically do, to offer any of her expertise or color commentary on the topic.
Well, thanks, Sam. On this one, I would say that if people are being successful with only 1 to 4 touches with most of their prospects, I hope in the breakout room you will raise your hand and let me know what secrets you have, because I don't think that that's reality for most of us. It may be reality in terms of what we actually do, but I think what happens in all too many cases is that we start touching our prospects. We may leave messages and send emails telling them the benefits of what we have to offer or the benefits of meeting with them, and then we make them ready for our competition when they swoop in later.
Great, thank you. Let's launch another poll while I start into the next section. So we've now established that successful prospecting strategy is a robust prospecting strategy that includes both cold calls and cold emails. So now the question becomes, how can we refine that strategy to make the most of both tools? And the first step towards an answer starts with a little basic psychology. You may have heard of Dr. Robert Cialdini's book, Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion. Our longtime insiders should recognize it because we touch on these principles often. But just some background, Dr. Cialdini is a professor of marketing and psychology, and his book is based on the premise that people don't often consider all relevant information or perform a rigorous cost-benefit calculation to guide their decisions. And instead, their brains use mental shortcuts to help them make decisions faster. Dr. Cialdini identified 6 principles of persuasion, laying out specific triggers that activate these mental shortcuts. And I want to talk about 4 of them today, very briefly, since they provide a key to some of the cold call and cold email strategies I'll talk about in the presentation. The first is reciprocity, which is based on the premise that people feel obliged to give back to others what they have received. So here you have the woman on the left asking her colleague to come over to her house for dinner this weekend. And he says, well, that's nice. I really should invite her over for dinner sometime soon. In the context of sales and marketing, it's been demonstrated that prospects are more likely to say yes to a request after you've already given them something of value. And that's because they feel compelled by the principle of reciprocity to give something back. The second principle is social proof, which is based on the premise that people look to the actions of others as a guide, especially when they're uncertain about what to do. The man on the left is saying, I love this product. Everyone I know loves it too. And the guy on the right wasn't sure about it, but sounds like everyone else likes it too, so I'll buy it. And you've probably used testimonials or case studies or referrals as a way to show prospects how you've helped others, and those are all forms of social proof. The third principle is authority, which is based on the premise that people follow the lead of credible, knowledgeable experts. So here the man on the left says, I've been helping clients achieve X for over 30 years. I want you to benefit from my expertise. The woman on the right is impressed that he knows what he's talking about and thinks she should probably listen to him. So using an outside expert to validate your product or service is one way to use authority, and another is to demonstrate your own expertise. And then the fourth principle that we'll touch on today is likability and familiarity, which is based on the premise that people prefer to say yes to those that they like and to whom they are similar. So the man on the left says, we went to the same school and we both love golf. The woman says, we have a lot in common. I'd much rather do business with him than a stranger. And then just building on this a little bit more, Dr. Cialdini published a follow-up book where he strengthened this idea, expanded it into the principle of unity, which is rooted in a shared sense of identity. So here, not only do people both like golf, but they share the same background, which makes the man on the right even more likely to respond and engage. Deb, did you have anything you wanted to add to this? I know this is one of your favorite set of ideas to talk about when talking about all forms of prospecting.
It is. I'll just mention that his second book is called Pre-Suasion, P-R-E-Suasion. And for those of you that are thinking about maybe reading some of his work, I think I might almost recommend that his second book, Persuasion, because he kind of reiterates everything he did in the first book and then goes on. So kind of getting two books in one.
Great. I'm just going to start another poll now. So this brings us to our third step in determining the best way to use cold calls and cold emails, and that's to sequence for better results. So I mentioned this earlier, but every call or email in itself is an opportunity to engage, but when you combine calls and emails into a cohesive strategy, you amplify the power of both tools. So you have the prospect here saying, I might respond to an email or answer a call, but your efforts to get my attention are more likely to succeed if you use both strategically. So I'm just going to cover two quick example sequences that illustrate how cold calling and cold emailing can amplify one another. If you call a prospect and can't reach them, you can always leave a scripted voicemail that mentions that you'll follow up by email, and then follow up with a personal email that mentions the voicemail. Seems pretty simple, but if you do it with a very clear strategy, this can be an effective way of amplifying both tools. So just to take a step back quickly, I wanted to take this opportunity to emphasize something that we think is really important at BusinessWise, and that's to have a voicemail strategy. I mentioned earlier that it's getting harder and harder to reach people on the phone, and what happens when your prospect doesn't pick up, you get their voicemail. Obviously not your first choice, but it's still an opportunity, and the most successful sales reps know how to make the most of it. And our go-to voicemail strategy at BusinessWise is called the boomerang message, which you can see on your screen. And it works great for prospects that are a competitor of one of your current clients. So here's how it works. Hi, prospect's first name. This is Sam. I'm calling regarding a specific competitor company who's my client. So this is a competitor of your prospect who's already my client. And the idea here is that it ties back to the psychological principle of social proof. People are more likely to do something that others are doing. So when they hear their competitors are using a product or service to their advantage, they're automatically curious and feel compulsion to respond.
I also want to just mention on that, Sam, that while most of the advice we give, we tell people to make it their own, this is one thing that I advise people to follow particularly, because as soon as you start changing it, if I were to say, this is Deborah Klein, I'm calling regarding the XYZ company who we've helped tremendously with doing their new business development, I've already totally messed up the messaging. So we'll have other sessions, or you can talk with your representative about the hows and whys of the boomerang message, but it's one that you have to follow exactly, and you're going to feel weird about it when you start out, but that's the only way it works. Because as soon as you say to someone, I'm calling regarding the XYZ company, and that is a competitor of theirs, it makes them wonder, well, why are you calling me about my competition? And it will help improve your results of getting callbacks. And maybe in the breakout rooms, your BusinessWise guy expert will tell you how to respond to that callback of somebody saying, why are you calling me regarding my competition?
Right, thanks for the clarification, Deb. But So obviously the boomerang message isn't going to be appropriate in every situation. For example, when you don't have your prospect's competitor as a client, or when you're not sure if you have permission to use the company's name. And that's when a warm-up message can be particularly helpful. So the idea is to use it as the first step in a 1-2 punch where the goal is to follow up with an email. And you can just keep it simple so that obviously this is a pretty simple message. Hi prospect, this is Sam with BusinessWise. Please get back to me a phone number. I'll follow up with an email with more details and look forward to speaking with you. And then a follow-up email might be something like this. Per my voicemail, I'm looking to set up a time for us to talk. Like you, perhaps our other industry clients want to fill their prospecting pipeline with more first-time appointments with targeted local decision makers. I can't promise any silver bullets, but you'll get executive insights on strategies, tactics, and tweaks that have helped other firms doing B2B sales in the city. Whether or not we ever do business, it would be great to connect, and I promise it'll be worth your time. And the idea here isn't to be gimmicky. So the reason it's so simple is because there's really a simple goal here, and that's to give your voicemail and your email something to hang on to other than just, hi, my name is Sam, and I'm looking for a meeting. And it makes each sound like it's anchored to something else, and that's something that just might be enough to get your prospect to sit up and take notice. And as you can see, the effect is subtle but important. So referencing your voicemail in the first sentence of this email clearly distinguishes it from every other cold email and tempts your prospect to keep reading. And then finally, as always, you want to be clear about how your prospect benefits from the act of merely engaging, even if they never become a client, which is why we find it very important to put in a line like, whether or not we ever do business, it would be great to connect, and I promise it'll be worth your time. It's clear about what your prospect stands to get, even if it goes no further than that conversation. So let's take a look at another sequence, and this time it's where the order is reversed. So here you're going to start with an email where you offer something of value, a set of tips or a link to an article or whatever you think might be useful, and where there are no strings attached. And then follow up with a cold call where the reason is to discuss the materials in your email. Here's an example of a warm-up email that we at BusinessWise might send to a prospect. And obviously the offer here is a set of cold call scripts. And again, we're not asking for anything, even an appointment. You know, we prompt them to respond if they have any thoughts or want to talk about it, but the idea here is to give them something, no strings attached. And in the follow-up call, you can take a couple of different approaches. If you get a gatekeeper, you can say, I've following up on some information I recently brought to prospect's attention. And that might be more likely for them to connect you with the prospect. When you talk to the prospect, the reason I'm calling is I'm curious to know what you thought of my recent email on new business development ideas. And so this can work whether you reach your prospect or a gatekeeper. And again, tying it back to the principles of persuasion, there's a few of them at work here. The first is reciprocity, which is probably obvious, giving something of value and then making a request. The second is authority, demonstrating your expertise and knowledge about a topic that your prospect cares about. And then a third might even be something like likability and familiarity. If nothing else, referencing your email implies that your prospect may already be familiar with you. And then you can use that warm-up email to emphasize anything else you may have in common with your prospect in an effort to create rapport. And then just quickly to reiterate the key points here, on voicemail, not having a voicemail strategy puts you at a disadvantage when there are creative ways you can use voicemail to boost lead gen results. And then you can see the different ways that cold calls and emails work together, first by using one to warm up the other, and the second by anchoring your outreach with a clear statement of purpose. Deb, did you have anything you wanted to add?
A couple of things. Again, a reminder that when you're trying to get a first appointment with someone, talking about how terrific your product or services are is a mistake, because what you're selling at this time is the appointment. You're trying to get your prospect to invest time with you, even if it's only 20 minutes. And talking about how great your products and services are isn't the right time. You've got to do that after you get that appointment. So you want to keep remembering what it is of value that you're bringing to this appointment, whether or not you ever do business with this prospect, because the prospect doesn't trust you yet. They don't know you. They're afraid you're going to waste their time. And those are the things you want to be thinking about before that first appointment.
So up to this point, we've been talking about one particular type of email, the one-off email that you send to a prospect in combination with a cold call. But of course, there are many different kinds of email lead generation. I wanted to talk a little bit about how you can use each to optimize your new business development. We've already talked about the benefits of one-at-a-time emails. They're highly targeted and personalized, which makes them perfect for use in combination with a cold call or voicemail. But they have some pretty big downsides if your goal is to be efficient with your new business development. They're time consuming. You can only reach prospects as quickly as you can write and send each email. And while the leads they deliver are generally high value, the volume of those leads is pretty low. But obviously, email also offers the ability to reach multiple prospects instantaneously through the use of either email marketing or email prospecting tools. So what's the difference? When we say email marketing, and we also call it drip marketing at BusinessWise, we're talking about the traditional batch and blast method of reaching prospects. So you create a campaign, you send it to all your prospects at once and get instantaneous results. And because you have total control over when you send it, it's perfect for time-sensitive offers like webinars or seasonal discounts. And even though it's more efficient than one-at-a-time email, it still requires a decent amount of ongoing effort and planning to do it consistently. It also requires you to be prepared to field all the responses you might get to any individual campaign. On the other hand, the right side of the slide, automated email prospecting is just that. It's an automated sequence of emails that's sent out gradually to your whole list of prospects over time. Campaigns can run for months at a time, sending out a few dozen emails a day and delivering a steady stream of leads. And of course, compared to one-at-a-time email, you sacrifice some personalization with both email marketing and email prospecting. And I don't blame you if you're wondering what about all this is new or revolutionary. You guys all know how to send emails, and you likely have experience with some form of email marketing. But this mix of tools really does become a lot more powerful in the context of a new business development strategy when you have email addresses for your prospects and can choose when and how you want to use email to reach them. As our clients know, BusinessWise makes it easy to send one-at-a-time emails to decision makers, and I would strongly encourage our clients to take advantage of that feature using the tips we covered today, particularly in combo with cold calling. BusinessWise also offers the ability to use drip marketing to target your entire audience with email blasts. And then in recent years, we've been able to add automated email prospecting to the mix. It's a strategy that's worked really well for some of our clients who'd never found success with email before. And that's because they didn't have the time to spend writing or sending emails to prospects every day or developing monthly campaigns. And for both drip marketing and in particular automated email prospecting, it's important to emphasize that these tools can have an immensely positive impact on your overall prospecting strategy. And that's because when you know you're touching all your prospects, even the ones you might consider to be lower value leads with email, you can focus your more personalized outreach channels like cold calling and one-at-a-time email on your very best prospects. So there's a benefit of an approach that uses different types of email in different ways to make other aspects of your prospecting and new business development more efficient. Deborah, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, a couple of things. One is please ask more about automated email prospecting in the breakout rooms, because we have seen such a positive response to that approach that I think you'll want to find out more about it, or certainly you can follow up with one of the wise guys. And there was a question to me in chat about when trying to set an appointment, how do you talk about the value of the appointment versus the value of your products and services? And again, that might be something to touch on in the breakout rooms, or please contact one of the wise guys to get more information about any of the points that we've touched on today.
Thanks, Deb. And that brings us to a final key point about the dilemma of when to use cold calling versus cold emailing to connect with prospects. And that's that you need to start with a good list to begin with. This whole question of whether and when to use cold calling or cold emailing really starts with that frustration I described at the beginning of the presentation of not getting a response from one or both channels. But the problem is far more likely to be with your list than with the prospecting tool you choose. And that's because if the prospect you're reaching out to isn't a good fit, then they won't have any reason to engage with a call, email, or any other attempt at a connection. We've covered this before in Insiders. This is just a very quick summary of a way you want to start building a list of high-value prospects, starting with the right demographics. So using your client demographics as a starting point to identify new prospects. There's no wrong answer. It all depends on your own business and its targets. You can then further refine that list by qualifying for psychographics. So asking your clients why they bought from you to identify prospects with similar challenges or priorities or other non-demographic characteristics. And then a key point is that lists like this, target markets, they're not static. It's not a list that you come up with once and use over and over and over again. It's more of a template that you continue to refine as your client list changes, as business landscape evolves, and that you can fill in with new businesses as they appear on the scene. And so a key point about target marketing, and it actually relates to a point I just made about how email marketing, email prospecting can improve the efficiency of your more personalized targeted approach. We always ask, would you rather call 1,000 prospects once each or 100 prospects 10 times each? And I think we asked a poll question earlier, how many touches on average does it take to complete an appointment? And for most people here, that was upwards of 9, 10, 11, 12, or even more. And so it's really valuable to be able to hone in on a specific group of high value prospects that you can reach out to multiple times. And then another key point here is that part of what makes a good list isn't just knowing the businesses that are on it, it's having both phone numbers and email addresses for your prospects. Your list won't mean much if all you have is phone numbers, because then you can't use email to amplify the power of those cold calls. And you can never get through to a decision maker if no one ever calls you back. And we're going to go deeper into the topic of target markets in our December session of Insiders, looking at 4 steps to craft an ideal 2021 target market for your business. So I hope you'll all join us for that. And I don't know, Deb, if you have any closing remarks, but in a moment I will start the breakout rooms. I'll invite Deb to make any final comments.
So, Sam, I don't know if this is possible, but could you just go over the poll results again? Is that possible, or are they gone once we?
That's a good question. They're not gone.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe we'll send them to everybody once we.
Yeah, I can
I was
certainly
just
do that.
curious, and okay.
Great. I'm going to stop.
Well,
okay.
I look forward to
go ahead,
everybody getting into one of the breakout rooms to discuss this in greater detail.